Uncle Simon attempts to explore the motivations of people staying in toxic and miserable situations for sometimes most of their life. It has a minimal cast, a full-size robot, and a script by Rod Serling. Sounds like either an engaging character study or an entertaining misfire. Turned out to be neither. Barbara Polk lives with her elderly Uncle Simon, tending to his every need for the past quarter century. Simon is verbally abusive to his niece, constantly berating her with insults and provoking her on a daily basis. The old man questions why she stuck around for so long when he treats her so poorly. The pent-up hatred in Barbara boils over, and she admits she just wants to outlive him and relax without his incessant orders. Simon argues that his niece is really only in it for his money and possessions. Their latest confrontation results in Simon looking to strike Barbara with his cane, but she grabs it from him first, and he violently falls back down the stairs to his laboratory door. As he lay dying, Barbara continues her diatribe against him, eventually rushing upstairs and breaking several items before finally opening the shades and windows, which her uncle always required to be closed. Sometime later, a man named Mr. Schwimmer reads Barbara Simon's last will and testament. She is indeed the heiress to his fortune and possessions, but only if she strictly adheres to several conditions. She must remain in the house and keep everything exactly as it is. An extra proviso also reads that Barbara must care for her uncle's experiments, specifically his last. Schwimmer is tasked with visiting the house once a week to ensure Barbara's end of the bargain is being kept. If she fails to live up to her uncle's demands, all of Simon's property is to be given to the state university. Schwimmer and Polk then walk down to the lab to discover Simon's final creation.
I'm a mechanical man, built by your late Uncle Simon Polk. It will be several days before I can function at maximum capacity.
You guys are never going to believe this. Are you ready? Come closer. Closer. That robot over there?
Robot!
Yes, robot. Yeah, that one. It made its first appearance in a 1956 science fiction movie called Forbidden Planet. It's true! Like dozens of props, costumes, and sets over the years, Twilight Zone again dug into its forbidden pocket and pulled out this guy. But unlike those other hand-me-downs from the movie, Robbie the Robot is a very well-known cultural mainstay who was already reused half a dozen times in other projects before this episode. This isn't even his last Zone appearance. Technically, it's not his first either. A little wind-up toy version of Robbie is in the first shot of Season 1's One for the Angels. He'd pop up again, full size, in the Brain Center at Whipple's, which we'll get to before the month is through. Robbie's got his own IMDb page, and he's had small parts or little cameos in productions as recent as The Big Bang Theory. For Uncle Simon, they changed his design a bit by swapping out his headpiece under that dome on top of his shoulders. It took 3 people to operate the lumbering character, including controlling the lights and gizmos across his body. According to Martin Grahams Jr., author of The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic, Vic Perrin provided the mechanical voice for Robbie as well.
Barbara!
Best part of the episode was this thing yelling for the niece. It's great. Perrin wasn't credited for his work here, but he was on screen in a pair of other installments. One of them, Ring-a-Ding Girl, we have yet to cover. Robbie the Robot's 9-ish minutes of screen time really is the most interesting thing about Uncle Simon. It's directed by Don Siegel, whose famous works include Invasion of the Body Snatchers and Dirty Harry, but not much of that talent is showcased here. The most distinct thing about he and Robert Pittick's visuals are unmotivated and jarring snap zooms that do nothing to bring the viewer into the story. Some sloppy cutting also presents itself in Rod's narrator appearance. They do the usual whip over from one of the characters in the episode, but don't reciprocate on Serling's end. They just cut to him. Apparently he wasn't on set for this episode, despite pictures of him and Robbie the Robot floating around out there, but this was the case for plenty of other appearances. Unfortunately, it's one of the few things that really caught my attention on this last rewatch. Cedric Hardwicke is fine as the titular character and does a decent job of spitting out the venomous insults Serling wrote for him.
You have all the grace and femininity of a high-buttoned shoe. You know, you're the only woman I know who looks as if underneath her clothes she wore clothes. You night-crawling imitation of the female gender.
Ian Wolfe as Mr. Schwimmer is little more than an exposition machine in his few scenes, but his delivery and expressions go along with the tone of the story well enough. Constance Ford as the lead doesn't give the viewer much to hang on to. Her character was defeated well before the episode began, and her demeanor fails to give it a much-needed spark. There are times when emotions break through her shell, but it doesn't land very well, despite reading Serling's sharp barbs. Pun intended, I guess.
I live for the moment when I can see you buried.
I am no longer sewing, Uncle Simon. As of right now, I am going to rape!
Isn't Mr. Schwimmer coming?
Yes, Mr. Schwimmer is coming.
The performances in general are nothing to write home about. The juxtaposition of a clumsy robot into this overly dramatic situation does create a few funny moments, but are they intentional? I don't think so. In the days since its activation, the mechanical man begins to take on characteristics of Uncle Simon, terrifying Barbara. After she's once again insulted hearing Uncle Simon's voice, she pushes the robot down the same stairs the elderly Poke met his end. We dissolve to a later date, after an inspection by Mr. Schwimmer. Barbara, dressed in her old clothes, does the bidding of the now damaged mechanical man. It walks with a cane and speaks abrasively in Simon Poke's voice. A final twisted point of contempt by the old man.
I'll fix it for you now.
You'll fix it for me now. What?
I'll fix it for you now, Uncle.
I really just don't care about Barbara's predicament. That's gotta be a failure across the board, because how do you make a character in this type of awful relationship so completely indifferent to sympathy? Even if she did lose it and let her uncle die, I don't think we're supposed to blame her all that much because of the decades of abuse she endured. Also, 25 years? Constance Ford was around 40 years old at the time of shooting, which would mean Barbara has been taking care of Uncle Simon since she was 15. Was she really all in it for the money at that age? It might be somewhat plausible, but she's not played inherently malevolent. If Simon wasn't such a jackass, I don't think she'd be hoping for his death. We're meant to understand some of her actions. To try and make this character bear responsibility in a story like this doesn't feel right, though. We should be rooting for her, making the ending more of a tragedy. Why does she stay anyway? Is she waiting for the robot to die now? At the very least, there should have been an extra thread that explained her uncle had something on her to make her stay, even from beyond the grave. Make it obvious there's no escape. One could argue that she's lived most of her life this way and she doesn't know anything else, but it's apparent she wants out. There's no reason for her to stay with the robot. Go get a job as a housekeeper or something, geez. A main character doesn't always have to be likable, but they at the very least have to be interesting, and Barbara is far from it. Admittedly, it's hilarious seeing the robot hobble around on a cane and watching the suit stay in frame after Barbara pushes it down the stairs, but I don't think that goofy suit makes this one worth checking out. I don't hate it. Personally, I'd just skip it. Leave the dull Uncle Simon poking around in a remote sector of the Twilight Zone.
Barbara!